Welcome to the Village Board meeting of Monday, October 24th. Excuse me. If you're watching on Monday, October 24th, we encourage you to call in with any questions or comments you might have at any time during the meeting. The number is 769-1677. So if you're watching on Monday, August 24th, please call in and let us know what you think. You can also be reminded that in addition to appearing on the government channel and PCTV via Cablevision, you can also watch the Village Board meeting either now or on-demand web streaming at www.pctv76.org. We've been pumping that up since it went live back in May. It's a great resource, a great website with an awful lot of material, not only from the Village and from PCTV, but also from the school district. So, again, 769-1677.
I talked to Shane, and he's in Moscow and contends he's watching it, so...
So, see that? You can watch from
Russian?
Anywhere.
I don't know.
Should have asked him that before he left.
Those of you...
Maybe that's just peace.
Sympathy to our colleague Mindy Berard, who has harmed herself and has her foot propped up under the table in a graceful manner that you could see if we didn't have this.
Thank God that you can't see.
Modesty panel. So she's hobbling around, but is here at the Village Board meeting anyway. Our next regular meeting is Monday, September 24 at 8 p.m. with a work session at 7. And the regular meeting that follows that is September 21 at 8 p.m. with a work session to follow. So a couple of updates before we get started. The first is we met 2 weeks ago, and those of you who are here or watching may recall that in the middle of the meeting a squall came screaming across Westchester County, and at one point we had, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 road closings. I went out and found a tree on top of my car, and the point I wanted to make about that is that at midnight we had quite a crew of our guys from DPW out with chainsaws and trucks, and it reminds us that there are an awful lot of people who work for the Village of Pleasantville who are on call for an event of that kind and leaving their own homes when there are tree limbs leaning on them to come and get the tree limbs off ours. So it was quite a night, and thanks very much to Bob Travis and Mario Sansota, who are the foremen who were out that night, to Steve Johnson, who leads the DPW crew, and to all the guys on the trucks. Quite an amazing night.
And our fire department too, who was
Absolutely.
out for your
Pleasantville
your
Volunteer
car there.
Fire Department.
Well, we all took a tour after the meeting around 12:30. Brian, Peter, and I drove around, and it was a lot of damage.
It certainly was. I segue into the point that at this point in time it's a little difficult to determine whether the damage we see on our streets was caused by the storm or by Con Edison. Con Edison has been, as you have heard at some of these meetings in the past, headed through the village as well as many other towns around on a program of aggressive tree cutting, supposedly to increase the reliability of the electrical system. We have had a number of meetings with them over a period of a couple of years and have sought to have them follow a number of guidelines that they have basically said they won't follow. They certainly have been courteous in the interaction, but they have asserted that they have the right to do what they think they need to do, and that we don't have the right to stop them. So what has certainly happened is that Steve Johnson and the guys in DPW have been on them like a terrier on your pants leg as they make their way around the village, but there have been quite a number of circumstances where, at least in my layman's view of things, it's hard to associate the work they have done with a reasonable balance between public needs and the reliability of the electrical system. So those of you who have been aggrieved by their work, I'm interested to get anybody's comments. We've asked Con Ed to come in again. In fact, I sent them an email today after a weekend of particularly egregious events, and the guy who's in charge of this program is on vacation. The person who's in his stead has yet to call me back. I will be on the phone again tomorrow, but recognize that the village is as unhappy as you are in many circumstances, recognizing, of course, the need to take some steps to improve the reliability of this electrical system, but feeling as though the compromises being made are not always logical. So that's where we are on that. If you guys who are watching have any specific comments you want to add, I encourage you to let us know, or let Patty Dwyer know in the village office so that we can add that to the list to discuss when Con Ed makes their appearance here. So I also wanted to let you know, as I have at every meeting in recent weeks, that We continue to go back and forth with Verizon regarding a cable contract for Verizon Fios services, and we now have in our possession, and we'll be discussing tonight in executive session, a big fat contract from Verizon that establishes a set of financial conditions as well as a number of other requirements that they have in their contract. And so there remain issues. Some progress has been made. It certainly is progress that we are actually looking at a document in its entirety that shows all the terms that Verizon wants to present to us, and I hope to be able to say more about that in the near future. If we believe that what we have in our hands warrants going to public hearing, we would go to public hearing, and am I correct, Patty, that at that point the terms of the contract could be made public?
That's correct.
So up until now, we are operating under the requirement that our negotiation is a private one between the village and Verizon, and I can assure you it has been a difficult and frustrating process.
When you say fat, you're referring to the size of the document?
Size of the
Yeah.
document, not
Just so
the...
that
Not
there's
the
no-
offer.
Just so there's no confusion.
Fat documents are almost always inversely associated with the value of the contract, aren't they?
No
So- Anybody else have anything they wanted to report?
Yes. Con Ed Indians came and whacked a tree in front of my house. They did a horrific job. No excuse for it. Being in the business, I can't imagine a more senseless and poorly considered job. But I would point out that I believe Con Ed employs a number of private contractors. My guess is there's very little guidance being given to those contractors for what to do, and they're probably being paid by the tree or maybe by the poundage. I'm not sure how the whole program is being effectuated, but I can say that the result of their attack on one particular tree at my property, which I specifically planted well off the power lines, is just jaw-dropping. And I don't think I've ever seen a tree contractor perform such an absolutely disgusting piece of work on a specimen plant, and I was just speechless. So it's not just some residents who've been getting their trees whacked. It's some of us
I'm
here
not
as
sure
well.
it's the... I think who's doing it are the guys I see building the freeway down in La Crosse County. I don't know if they're...
I think the latest group we've had contract
Asplund,
is Asplund, which is a tree service. The previous group was Lewis Tree Service, and Steve reports that the foreman on the Asplund crew has been more responsive than the foreman was on the previous crew, but that is maybe damning with faint praise. So,
You know, the problem is that they just come through our neighborhoods and cut first, and then
if
ask
you're not
questions
home,
later.
that's
If
it.
nobody's home,
Yeah.
then you come to
My
this...
wife was home and confronted them, and she was summarily dismissed.
Right.
And I mean, just the whole situation is just inexcusable.
I understand.
And I think that the problem is that there is no guidelines for these people
Right.
to require them, not just suggest, but require them to act responsibly. They're being paid, they're contractors, they're not being paid to be nice, they're not being paid to be sensitive, they're not being paid to be aesthetic. They're being paid to whack as many trees as possible in an 8-hour day, or whatever the contract calls for.
Right.
The performance is not to do something that's sensitive and thoughtful to the neighborhoods and to the people who are affected. And that, I think, is a serious and significant failure on the part of Con Ed. Not to have those kinds of controls built into their contracts.
So Steve and I, being the newest members on the board, how did it come to this?
Well,
Why
first
is it that
the
this
first
is
thing they
going
did
on?
was they came through without warning. This time they at least, because of we complained, they put these messages on your door that we've identified a tree on your property that we're going to, we're going to take down or prune or whatever. It was one of the above. And if you have any questions, and they left a number to call. And that was a result of them going on the aqueduct, correct? I'm correct in this, right? They went on the aqueduct and off of Bedford and down Broadway behind all of everybody's house there, and they cleared everything. I mean, shrubs that were this high that would never even reach a phone wire or any wire, they just cut them all down. And those neighbors came in and they were very upset, and you could see the backs of their houses that are on Broadway from Bedford Road now. You could see like directly through. So I think at that point, Bernie had contacted Con Ed and...
Well, I can tell you, they did not leave any messages on our property.
You didn't
or
get a
Nothing.
They didn't even put a circle around your tree?
I mean, and there was
They
the
didn't.
same...
They just showed up one morning with the truck.
Oh.
I was at work.
And
Just
they
had a call from
also
my
were
wife
supposed
there.
to give Steve, and Steve spoke with them and give us warning of where they were coming, and they did this time send us a list at least and said they're going to be pruning or taking down trees in certain areas, which Peter, you read over during a meeting. But the thing is that I think that list that they gave us, they did that and like 10 times more, and they cut down trees that they didn't identify
But my
in the
question
list to us. Anyway.
Where did they get this right? Is this the PSC?
Well,
Is this the PSC
here's what happened
that
way
allowed
back,
this?
if anybody's recollection is different. Two things happened. One was there was that big blackout a few years ago that was found to be the result of a rather modest tree coming down on a high-tension wire tower, and that produced a plan to clear-cut underneath high-tension towers across the Northeast, and that's why they did the project in the Old Village and
Right.
the aqueduct up by Leland and around the pool. Then there was a period of, was it 2 or 3 years ago, when Queens was out of power for some extended period of time. Sections of Queens out of power for 2 weeks or something. And the New York State Legislature went after Con Ed and said, you have to do something to improve the reliability of your grid and all of that. If I recall the numbers correctly, I think Con Ed got a budget of $25 million for tree trimming in Westchester County, and went through on a much more aggressive program than they had ever had before. They established these new guidelines, which I think were 15 feet above and 10 feet on either side of a power line, 5 feet below, and there is a grim, attractive little brochure with grim little pictures in it, some of which have been replicated in our town of, what were once nice trees that have now been turned into sort of
They're like
Y-shaped
forks,
things.
yeah.
But at any rate, Con Ed came in. They made clear to us that they believe they have the right from the state as a public utility to do what they need to do, that they have the right to do any of that in the right-of-way that's impinging upon their wires. If they find a tree on private ownership, that they recommend be substantially trimmed or taken down, and if the homeowner denies it, they indicated that the homeowner would potentially be subject to consequential damages. And we asked for their counsel to forward the legal basis for that. They declined, all very courteous and all very unhelpful. So I sent an email this morning. I'll read it to you, to a guy named Jim Feeney, who we've dealt with before. I called Matt Glasser this AM. He's the guy that runs the program in Westchester. His voicemail indicates he's away this week. I spent part of the weekend fielding calls from residents about your tree trimming work, including at least one who is considering a damage claim against you due to damage to a specimen pinout. Based on my own review of several sites, I find it hard to justify some of the work your crews are doing in this village, and its residents will bear a significant cost to recover from the damage you have wrought. Please direct me immediately to the person who's in charge of this work. In Matt's absence, no call back. So I'll be on that again tomorrow. So.
Are any municipalities in Westchester challenging this?
I asked Steve Johnson that question, and he was going to call Scarsdale. He understood that Scarsdale had taken an aggressive posture with them, and I'm waiting to hear back. Do you know, Patty?
I believe Scarsdale's the only community that prohibited Con Ed from cutting any right-of-way trees.
Sam, this is your
And under
breaking
what
story.
and under what authority? I mean, Con Ed
Get on
asserted
it,
we had no right to stop
investigative
them. So
Scarsdale just said you can't come.
Well, this would be good.
You know, I just
Ask
think
Marcus.
it's such an outrage. If I don't know.
It is an outrage. Some of
We
the
need to
beautiful
consider
trees
doing
are
the
putting
same thing. Stop what you're doing, and let's until we talk about it.
Well, they are under permit. We can issue a stop work order.
I think given what's happened in the last, what all of us have heard and what's been done.
The permit's issued by the superintendent of public works, so I'll ask him to consider that.
I think we need to talk to him about
all right.
this.
Well, so let's have a conference call tomorrow morning with Steve.
There are trees that have been so damaged in this village that they've subsequently been taken
It's true.
down.
It's true.
So this is in we're trying to create, we've worked a long time to create a beautiful village street right through the heart of the village, Bedford Road, And they're just undoing a decade of work here, tree planting and you know, care that we all give to that boulevard.
All right, certainly, I think all of us are in common view about that. So Patty, let's talk tomorrow morning with Steve and see whether a stop work order is the appropriate thing to do in order to get these guys in here. It's disturbing, among other things, to think that this level of work is going on and the guy at Con Ed who supervises it is on vacation. So,
Right.
Okay, one other point I wanted to make is that I have been, over the last few months, making the rounds of commercial real estate brokers, just picking their brains about what's going on in the Pleasantville market. And later this week, I'm going to Massachusetts to meet with the Stop and Shop Corporation. They are the owners of the MLA property and have owned, down on Marble Avenue near the edge of the village. They've owned it now for pushing 10 years, having bought it from the previous owner, Medical Laboratory Automation. And so it has taken quite some doing to find my way to the right people, but I am meeting with them later this week, and we'll have a report on that when I get back. So all of that's going on in the coming week. Any comments from the public at this point? 769-1677, don't hesitate to call. We have a continuation of a public hearing regarding a local law amending Chapter 173, Vehicles and Traffic, Section 173-63. Hello? Bill Troll? Yes. Hey, Bill. Would you like to be on the air? Okay, hold on a second. You there?
I'm
He was.
perspective on the Con Ed trimming. We had a little incident with a tree on my property. Following, we had a power outage, which was caused by a branch falling down on two primaries, and it was a dead branch, something that was probably trimmed off by Con Ed. I do believe that if Con Ed had not done what they had done previously, when my tree came down, when the tree came down in the Pocket Park and the garden apartments across the street, we could have had a significant more amount of damage than we actually did. Everybody I know that's on Martling that has had branches come down, has seen problems going on, has pretty much been consistent in that they're very happy that Con Ed did what they did when they did it. Whether that is 100%, I don't know. But I know from my perspective, I think that if they had not trimmed the trees the way that they had done it, it probably would have been a lot worse when my tree went down, and also when the tree came down across the street. As far as controlling it, we have a lot of very old trees, a lot of poorly planted, the specimen trees that were planted on Bedford Road way back when are basically acknowledged by all municipalities, states, and cities as to not have been a really good breed of tree to plant. We have a lot of trees with hollows, indentations, rot, and its core. And this isn't going to change. So these trees that were planted 100 years ago, 90 years ago, 120 years ago, as part of what Pleasantville thought was the right thing to do at the time, is not going to be beneficial to us in the future. These trees are going to come down. One at a time, two at a time, three at a time, storms, whatever. I say let Con Ed limit the damage that we get from these trees coming down. And if it's not pretty, it's not pretty, but it's a lot prettier than the tree coming down and taking out the power lines with it. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the call. You and Con Ed agree. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think anybody on this board in our meetings with Con Ed has dismissed the need for Con Ed to be doing some work to protect their wires. The question is, it's a balancing act, and as Steve pointed out, unfortunately, the level of care that one can expect from a Con Ed tree clearing crew is not the level of care that we might wish to have. So it's a compromise and a battle, and I think we'll end up with a better result if we remain on top of it. In addition, although we've cut the budget a little bit this year based on the economic conditions, we've had a pretty aggressive tree planting program over the last 10 years and hope to continue that. I think some of those tree locations have been found to be suspect based on what Con Ed has done to a couple of these elm trees that were planted near the power lines, and so we'll have to take that into account going forward so that the investment we make in new trees is protected in the future. So Steve's input on that will be greatly appreciated, he being a professional landscape architect. So, all right, back to our public hearing, local law amending Chapter 173, Vehicles and Traffic, regarding parking prohibited certain hours on Weskora Avenue. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
The proposal that is in place is to establish a no parking zone on the east side of Weskora Avenue between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. from Pleasantville Road to Spring Street. We've discussed this a number of times in the past. The proposal here arises from a request from residents in that area to do something to limit all-day commuter parking on Weskora Avenue. What we have in place in many of the streets near the local downtown is restrictions of one kind or another so that the street does not become a de facto commuter parking area. And in the case of Weskora, the notion is to establish a 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. no parking requirement on the east side so that you couldn't park there all day long and take the train to the city. So any comments on that subject?
Do we just open this to close it? I thought we were holding this open until this fall when people were back from vacation.
We were going to open it last time and then didn't get to it because of a very long agenda.
Why don't we just talk about this till November?
Patty?
We just open
Well,
it.
I'm fine with it. I just wonder what the
I
strategy
mean,
is.
this fulfills the request of the community, of the neighborhood, correct?
It did, but there were comments. There were comments from the audience about having the availability of any parking in that
Right,
neighborhood.
and so the
because
question
there's
we
a
were going to
park there.
address, and
Yeah.
do you know the answer to the question of what the parking requirements are elsewhere? The issue being to make sure that there's always a place to park, even between 10 and 11, if you want to go to the park.
Well, there aren't. There'd have to be an alternate side parking restriction then, perhaps.
So what's
put
the
in
story
place.
on
And also, the chief is suggesting the entire length of Weskora, not just to Spring Street. So I think, we can take comments if there are any additional comments, but I would suggest that we get the neighborhood in to see really what the issue is at hand and make
Okay.
sure that we don't overextend.
all right, and Spring and
The
Roselle
local
are
law.
also no parking 10 to 11?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask one quick question? Did we have advice from council that we could not restrict parking on these local streets to residents?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, how is it that New York City has parking by permit only on a number of the side streets, a program that was instituted a couple of years ago, and those permits only go to residents?
They don't fall under the general municipal law that villages and towns operate
But-
under vehicle and traffic. They have their own,
But maybe my question
Code.
is are there ways to get around?
like the city of Rye does. The city of Rye has resident-only parking near the beach, if you ever try to park over there by Oakland
Right,
Beach.
right.
And some communities have gotten special legislation. In Albany, we would have to get special legislation to
But it-
restrict public streets for, exclusively for residents.
But if we didn't use the residence word, if it was by permit, and those permits were restricted to residents. The reason I'm asking is that it just didn't seem, from what I had seen in other locales, logical to assume that there wasn't some way the other localities were getting around this issue. And I'm not sure I would be particularly supportive of resident-only parking if there's a better way to do it, per se. But it just struck me as...
The chief gave us that whole write-up
Yeah.
on the law, the village law, and we'd have to change, as Patty was saying, the legislation. He
I remember.
was here a
Yeah.
couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to get back to us, though, on one specific issue.
Well, there's still an open legal question that he
Yeah, right.
needed to refer to Joel.
But Steve, this issue is a little different. We have another request from another resident who is aggrieved by the parking requirements on her street. they being requirements that are established for the same reason, to try to keep the street from turning into a commuter parking lot, and make those spaces available to residents. But what it means is that a resident has the potential to get a ticket in front of their own home if they park there for longer than an hour or 2 hours, whichever it is. In this circumstance, the issue is different, in part due to the fact that we have a major public facility there in the form of Roselle Park, and we want it to be possible for people to go there and park and use the playground and the field. And so resident-only parking wouldn't apply here anyway, the issue being to try to create a balance so that residents have an opportunity to park. The neighborhood doesn't turn into a way to avoid paying for a parking permit at the expense of a residential neighborhood. So.
I think in this neighborhood, the situation was we were trying to come up with a way to avoid commuters using those local streets to
Right.
park all day long.
Right.
So with the hour slot taken out during the middle of the day, they
Right.
couldn't leave on
Right.
the train and come back at 6
Right.
for that block of time.
Right, and the rules are different in some of the streets that are very close to the downtown, where we've had issues with business people parking, and if you have a circumstance like this with just 1 hour in the day where you have to move the car, that's okay with a certain number of people who will jockey the car once. So it's a whole web of rules, and every rule you create begets another problem. But the basic, I think, theory is sound, and that is that we have commuter parking. We ask people to buy permits when they're available. There are obviously a lot of people out of town who would like to commute from the Pleasantville train station. It'd be great to accommodate them if we could, but we can't do it at the expense of our own tax-paying neighborhoods.
Well, at any rate, then, this should be put off until the residents have an
All right.
opportunity to come and speak.
And Tony's suggestion, the chief's suggestion, is to change this and repost it for the entire length of Weskora?
Yes.
Okay.
Then you
In
should-
which case, we'd have to renotice it.
I would
Right.
just close it and.
All right.
And
So we'll
renotice.
close this, we'll renotice it with the broader provisions, and then speak to the neighborhood again.
This could go till November, couldn't
It
it?
could.
Yes, you may get your wish.
Come on, that'd be fast. All right.
year.
Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion. Can't hear me? I'm back? Sorry about that.
It was on the phone.
Yeah, I moved it for the phone. Okay, we have a number of resolutions, some of which I know of are interest to the audience here. I just wanted to do one thing before that, and that is to let people know what discussions we're having in work session, both before this meeting and afterwards. We had a discussion that will have to be continued about the stone wall in front of the tennis courts on 117 near Foxwood. As you may be aware, there is a long and decorative stone wall that dates back from the original estate that was there. A piece of it belongs to the village in front of the tennis courts, and it has been sagging over a period of time, and sometime in the last year we took down a big section of it which looked like it was at risk of tipping. So we now have a black chain link fence there, and we have a preliminary proposal from an engineering firm for about $7,000 to put together a bid and spec package to consider rebuilding the wall, and his approximate estimate of the probable cost of the work somewhere in the area of $55,000 to actually rebuild the wall. So the discussion we had in the current environment is, what's a realistic way to go forward? Are we able to expend that kind of money to rebuild the wall in its original form? Should the wall be taken down and replaced with something different? What would be the implications of that for the community? What would be the implications for Foxwood? And what would make sense? So we'll continue that discussion, and we'll all be looking at the wall ourselves in the course of the next couple of weeks to continue it. And comments, if anybody has them, would be welcome. You can forward them to Patty at the Village Hall. So we also have a number of things on our list tonight to discuss: some zoning code revisions, capital planning for the refuse district. We confront the potential need to buy new garbage trucks, and therefore are interested in putting together a capital plan that would make clear what the long-term costs are of providing refuse service in-house, as opposed to alternatives like outsourcing or some other means of doing it. We are reviewing the crossing guard budget and posts, discussing the idea of policies for applicants appearing before various boards, which might connect resolving tax arrears before you were able to appear before village boards, and are also going to be putting together an annual schedule of meetings and presentations so that the public can take a look on the website and see which departments and which commissions and boards will be having a presentation and discussion at a given board meeting well into the future. So after we finish our regular session, we're going into executive session to discuss the aforementioned Verizon cable TV contract, and we also have advice of counsel regarding dedication of roads, as well as a number of matters regarding personnel and litigation. So will be here for a while. I'm glad you're here with us right now. So, without any other comments, we can go to the resolutions. Steve, number 162.
Resolved that pre-check register dated August 24th, 2009, covering check numbers 64-238 through 64-323 has been reviewed and is hereby approved as listed below. General fund, $156,099.35. Miscellaneous revolving fund, $1,170. Water fund, $122,603.52. Capital fund, $32,860.14. Refuse fund, $12,664.25. Pool fund, $39.22.81. Trust and agency, $14.02.50, for a total of $320,722.57.
Is there a second?
Second.
Comments, questions?
I have a, Patty, I noticed some small expenses still for the music festival. Are there still things coming in for the festival, and when will it be finalized? And
There are probably a couple of bills left. Typically the T-shirts, for some reason that comes in every year around September, October.
Why?
And it's just the company that bills us. And I don't know what else, but there are open receivables and there are open payables. So we're not close to closing out the results of the festival
Do
yet.
you think within a month?
Yeah, we can get an idea of what the invoices will be. I mean, we can,
Is it fair to say,
I mean, it was only
as I
July,
think
yeah.
you and I discussed earlier,
it's only a
that...
month ago. It seems like it was a long time ago, but...
Yeah. Is it fair to say, as you and I discussed at one point, that it looks as though we have probably
I think it's fairly flat.
broken even?
I think we've
Roughly
done-
broken even?
Yeah, I think we've broken even.
Okay.
It was a very
Thank
good
you.
day, very successful day.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. Minute?
163.
163 minutes.
What's that?
Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Pleasantville hereby approves the minutes of the meetings held on Monday, August 10th,
I think so.
2009, and they are hereby approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Judy, I just had noticed one thing on the bottom of page 1, last paragraph, saying right now that site distance, SIGHT. Aside from that, sorry to put you through such a long set of minutes. Any other corrections?
Well done,
Just that
though.
one little one.
I was going to say yes. Well done, yes.
Well done.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Jonathan, 164.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Pleasantville hereby appoints Emmanuel D. Nunez as Peace Officer for the Justice Court at a salary of $20 per hour, effective August 25th, 2009.
Is there a second?
Second.
This is a new category of employee that we have not had before, based on the requirements of the Office of Court Administration, who I have told you in the past are the progenitors of the thing we sit at. We've been required to change the practices in the court, including having a metal detector, and when you have a metal detector, you're required to have a licensed peace officer who is responsible for controlling the metal detector, making sure people go through it, and dealing with any violations that may appear. So,
And this is our second one, right?
Yes, we
We'll have two.
budgeted for both of them.
okay. So we will now have 2 court officers, and are we going to use them interchangeably? How is that going to...
No, they'll work simultaneously.
I mean, we don't need 2, do we, on a given day?
Well, we do.
We have to have 2?
We do, because if one has an issue with somebody walking through the door, the other one still has to continue the business of...
So we have 2 court officers now.
We budgeted for 2 for each court session, yes.
Is that part of the state guidelines?
Yeah, it's best practices, yeah, to have 2.
And all courts have that?
I think all
Do we
courts
think-
do have that.
Okay. I mean, it's not a matter we have any choice about, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion approved. Brian, 165.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby extends the deadline for recreation center requests for proposals to 4 p.m. on October 30th, 2009.
Is there a second?
Oh, second.
You may recall that we posted a request for proposals for the purchase and adaptive reuse of the old recreation center, which is at the corner of Bedford Road and Great Oak Lane, and had that up on the website. It is still up on the website, I hope. Patty, is that true? If it's not, it will be.
Archived, but it's there. I'll
Well,
have
let's
to
unarchive.
bring it up to the top of the bulletins.
We had a request for proposals that we requested that interested potential buyers submit to us by August 15th their interest in buying the property, the use they would put to it, and some reasonable detail about what they would do to make that happen. There are a number of requirements attached to the RFP. The village, as part of the proposed sale, would require that the building be preserved, that its exterior be restored to its original condition consistent with the Secretary of the Interior preservation standards. And we received a number of expressions of interest, including a couple of people who found out about this only in the last week, sent letters that they are interested in submitting a proposal but had not had time to put it together in detail. So recognizing the fact that as of April 15 we had no complete proposals, but we had, I'm sorry, August 15, we had no complete proposals, but we had expressions of significant interest from several people. We're extending the deadline to October 30 to give those people a chance to put together a good proposal. So,
How are we advertising this now? How did we ultimately go?
We've published the legal notice. We'll publish another, and we put it on our website, and that's the extent of our...
I'm just wondering
well, we've also
Get the word out.
emailed it around in a number of different places. I don't doubt that we can do a better job, and we should.
Right. If we're really looking to get some action on this, it seems like the legal notice isn't the place people go for real estate listings.
No, but we're not using a broker, so it's a little difficult.
Well, brokers are aware,
Maybe I
right?
can find a for sale by owner website and pop something up there.
Come on, Patty, you're good with the...
Yeah,
Brokers are aware,
I'll
though.
take a look.
I mean, we've been
Well, they
contacted
are,
by
but
a
I mean, they're
couple.
not...
Why don't
Well,
we
they want a fee. I mean, you know...
Well,
Why don't we put a for sale by owner sign up front?
We discussed doing that. I thought we were...
Yeah, we
we
were
did.
going to
We
do
got
that,
a
and we
little
didn't.
hung up on the architectural style of the sign.
All right, so remind me and let's get that done.
I
We'll
don't
get a
know what
sign,
to
an
do.
appropriate sign up on
I
the
can buy
sign.
the
So-
cheap one
You
at
could Burger
Burger's.
Hardware and get a sign.
Yeah.
Well, it'll look
Come on,
hokey.
it's the overlay district.
Well, why don't we get the overlay to get out there and do it?
Sure you'll do that?
I will do
Put
that.
it right next to the beware of dog sign I'm putting up
We'll
here,
get that
too.
accomplished. So recognize, yes? Yes. Can you've got to hear it at the mic. I'm sorry to make you do that.
That's okay.
What's that?
Just a thought on this.
You have to give your name and
Oh,
address.
Otto Lyons, 154 Berridge Road. My apologies. The Penny Saver has a section for businesses for sale, I believe, in properties, and you may want to think of something along those
Okay.
lines, considering
Yeah.
people...
Well, that would be
Well,
reasonable.
that's fair.
Right.
Yeah, they have good circulation.
And Patty, why don't you send it out via email to the Westchester chapter of the American Institute of Architects,
Okay.
because it's really an interesting building and that might generate some interest as well. So recognize that we have not made a commitment to sell it. We're just soliciting potential interest.
Theda White on Green Meadow Road. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has extensive lists of historic buildings that are listed in its magazine and on its website. And people who are interested in restoring, preserving, tend to look at those. So it might
Great.
be, I don't know what it costs, but
Yeah.
it probably isn't much to do a listing.
That'd be great.
Love that.
They used to publish in the back of that newspaper. Do they still do a quarterly newsletter?
They have a magazine, I think it's 6 times
Yeah.
a year or
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
but they also have a website
Right.
with real estate listings.
All right, great. Thank you,
Theda,
Theda.
what's the name, Theda?
National Trust for Historic Preservation. They're based in Washington. All right. Did we vote on this? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion approved. Steve?
Now we're up to 166.
Yes.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Pleasantville has received a copy of the fiscal year ending 2008 Justice Court Audit and will cause the same to be filed with the Office of Court Administration pursuant to Section 219A of the Uniform Justice Court Act.
Is there a second?
Second.
The village is annually audited by O'Connor Davies, Munns and Dobbins, and a couple of months ago that firm came and presented to us the results of the audit. Included as part of the audit is the section on the Justice Court, and pursuant to a state law requirement, we are annually required to provide our court record docket and audits to the state, and we are fulfilling that with this resolution. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mindy.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Pleasantville hereby authorizes the village administrator to sign the agreement with Musco Lighting, 100 First Avenue West, Oskaloosa, Iowa, for maintenance of the lighting at Parkway Field.
Is there a second?
Second.
Patty, you want to explain this?
I will try. I can't actually find my copy.
All right. Well, I'll take a shot at it
I don't
here.
have
A
one.
long way to look.
Correct me
Oh,
if you
yeah.
want.
Specifically, why it has to be 10 years?
This must have been the arrangement the village accepted when it accepted the lighting package. And unfortunately, I wasn't here during the first go-round, but the 10 years are expiring this year, as you can see by the agreement. And this is the warranty that comes with the system, the lighting system. And you can see by the cover letter from Mark Keller that the village did have several service calls, did basically require maintenance that would have exceeded the warranty coverage cost if, in fact, we didn't have a warranty agreement. So,
Well,
I
did we
would
reach
think-
our 3,000 hours or 10 years? I mean, it just seems like an awful long time.
yeah, I mean, it's not something I'm used to seeing. It's probably standard to their industry. I mean, we would not go anywhere else to have those lights repaired. You know,
Well,
we just
What
would
was the
not-
repair on the timer? Do we know? Because that was a faulty timer issue.
Let's see. We had 2 claims for the field. They had to bring lifts in, so no, it wouldn't have been the timer. So if they had to get up to the lights, it would have been a problem with the lighting system.
Well, in addition, this 10-year agreement, the way I read it is that this $8,670 is the amount for the entire 10 years.
That's right.
It's not $8,670
No.
each of 10 years.
No, it's 10 years.
So it's $867 a year.
I didn't read
And
it that way.
as part of that, they provide all labor and materials to maintain the operation of the system for a period of 10 years, as well as one complete relamp of the facility, including lamps, labor, and lifts,
Right.
which is about to happen at the end of the 10-year warranty. So for $867 a year, they come and replace lamps when they burn out, as I read it, and also at one point in the 10-year period, replace them all with the latest one. Is that the way I read it? It does not...
Yeah, I read this to be an annual charge of $8,000, but boy, if
That's what I did,
if it's
too.
a $800 charge for a year,
It's a total
you're getting a heck of a deal,
Well,
I think.
but the point being that
It's a 10-year
in the last 10 years, by their description, they only came 2 times.
That's because they live in Iowa.
No, we only had 2 calls.
Yeah, but I thought it paid for the contract.
Pretty hard to service
We had 2
something.
calls, and then, which was worth about $6,000, and then they will relamp the total field, which brings the cost to about $10,000. Well, I dare say that the critical question is this an annual fee, in which case it seems very high, or is it a 10-year fee?
It's not an annual fee. I've never
All right.
seen an
But it's
agreement like
not
this in all the years
clear,
I've
you
been
can't
here.
read this and be sure of that. Is there any reason we can't table this and make sure we understand what we're getting?
Not a hurry.
Okay.
We'll get them to clean up the language, so there's no question.
And relamping, that would mean the light bulbs
Right.
of similar wattage or...
Yes.
A very long
All right.
ladder.
So,
They
Yeah, well,
are-
I'm just concerned, because we had, back when this was put into place, we had a lot of concerns about the brightness of the light, and I'm concerned that at this point, somebody says, you know, it could be a little brighter, and
No,
then we have problems. with
Now there's new
neighborhoods.
lights that are apparently more economic and...
Well, right, exactly, and I think we
So,
should be
and
thinking about that, too.
Right.
Are they more expensive?
so
and
all that can be discussed. Let's
Exactly.
get Mario to give us the details, get this thing clarified to make crystal clear that it's a 10-year fee and understand what we're getting for it. So,
Table.
So we're
Table
tabling
it.
Musco?
right? All in favor? Aye.
That's 100.
Tabled.
Their office is 100 First Avenue West in Oskaloosa, Iowa. 100 First Avenue. Is there one avenue?
You got to put in good bulbs because it's too long to come to fix it.
I can make that
Well,
joke
you know
since
there's
I'm
a
from
wine-
Ogden, Utah, so it doesn't
And
really...
there's a Main Street, too.
All right,
probably.
come on, guys. 168, Jonathan.
The Board of Trustees of the Village of Pleasantville hereby gives the power of attorney to the village administrator, Patricia Dwyer, to settle tax issues with New York State Department of Taxation and Finance on behalf of the Village of Pleasantville. And I dare say, if you do the job, I will give you power of attorney to me, too.
Is there a second?
Second.
Patty?
That's a simple issue, Mayor. We had a project where we disposed of material that's considered hazardous waste by the state of New York. It was basically the scrapings from the paint on the water tank. And when we had that product separated and tipped at a special landfill, we paid an assessment for that waste to be treated separately. The DEC charged that assessment, and it was quite steep. Unbeknownst to us, once the state finds out that there's an assessment and a special hazardous waste tipping, they charge a tax that we are not exempt from. We paid the tax under protest, and we were told, I believe 24 months after the fact the tax was due, that there'd be a penalty on top of that, almost equal to the tax. It's under $2,000, what I'm arguing about here, but in fairness to the village as a municipality, I think paying a tax is pretty egregious, and paying a penalty on that tax is even more egregious. I can't see how they're going to come after us for it, but we'll argue it. We're entitled to a hearing, and we've asked for one, but they won't talk to me unless you give me power of attorney to argue it. So the hearing is September 15th, and I don't want to pay a regular attorney to sit there and argue for $1,800. So
I thought they canceled it because they thought that was...
no, we had to pay.
No, I thought they canceled the hearing.
They did. They said they think it could be settled over the telephone, but
Yeah.
they still won't talk with me. At least I don't have to go to New
So
Rochelle
you're
and
going to
sit there all
do the
day.
hearing over the telephone?
Yeah, if I get power of attorney.
And
And I promise I
Yeah.
won't abuse it. I'll just...
If you're
stick to this
successful,
issue.
you're going to hang a shingle out?
Yeah, that'll be it.
All in favor?
Aye.
But I've done this before with DEC
You-
over the years.
You are now empowered.
Thank you. Wish me luck.
169, Brian.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby approves the proposal from Surtech 43 Spring Street, Ramsey, New Jersey, to perform a topographic survey of Church Street as set forth in their proposal dated February 3rd, 2009, at a cost not to exceed $5,500.
Is there a second?
Oh, I have it too. It was
Second.
backward.
Second.
I have the list of
Yeah.
this behind.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, we
This is
had this Surtech proposal, and we also have behind it a proposal from another company. Was that included for...
Well,
Just
here's
for
the sequence of events.
comparative
Back this winter, PCI, our engineers, professional consulting, solicited bids for a survey of Church Street referencing the sidewalk project, and the scope of work specifically involves, per the letter of request, approximately 1,550 linear feet of topographic survey that includes establishing right-of-way boundary and other residential property lines above and below ground utilities, trees, man-made structures, and other site features of the area. They described the scope as survey work, sent it out to 5 local surveyors. 3 bids came back. Thomas Merritt's $10,900, Riley Land Surveyors $8,950, Surtech Surveying Technologies $5,500. At the time, we did not act on that, pending further discussion of whether we needed it or not. And I'll state my own opinion on this, which is that based on the discussions we've had so far and the presentation discussions we had 2 weeks ago with Bernie Adler and with community members, it seems to me that in order to make a reasoned decision about how to go forward and what our range of options are, we need to know who owns what and where we have right-of-way. So it would be my opinion that we should approve this proposal of $5,500. Patty, you have sent the 1957 document to SureTech?
I did. I didn't get a response
Yeah.
to whether or not that was useful to them, but I'm
Okay.
assuming if it isn't, it's still $5,500 or less, so we might as
Right.
well consider a resolution for that being the upset amount.
Right, so it may be that some piece of that 1957 document reduces the cost, so.
It could. Yeah, but I don't know.
Is this the only information we have from Surtech? Because it really doesn't even outline their
It does.
services.
No, I have the full scope of work. It's based on PCI scope, which was really comprehensive, and the topographical information it required and the markings it required. So all he did was say his
Here is
quote.
the letter.
I mean, I
to
didn't
which it
recirculate it,
refers.
but we've had it since February. It was a full scope of
Right.
work, and all they did is hold their price.
I mean, the circumstance we're in right now is we've talked about path, we've talked about the old cow path, we've talked about sidewalk, we've talked about north side, south side, we've talked of what's in the way, we've talked of where it's easier, where it's harder. In the end, none of that can really be brought to any closure, in my view, until we know who owns what and what we confront.
So that 57 map wasn't really authoritative enough for us?
Well, I think they'd have a hard, I think any PE would have trouble using somebody else's, material and stamp it as their own. I think they would want to verify. I mean, they could use it for
Well, further, it was now
verification,
52
right.
years ago, so there's no reason,
Yeah.
the property lines in some respects may have changed, ownership may have changed, subdivisions might have happened,
Right.
power lines and fire hydrants that weren't there before could be there now. Hopefully it's a document that puts them on second base, but Con Ed has made their job easier.
Con Ed has made their job easier.
At any rate, any other comments on that?
Well, I mean, I guess my question is, based on the discussion we had in work session with the known expenses that we're going to have, and I objected to sort of every expense that we've had for the last 4 or 5 months because of what we know we're going to encounter next year. I mean, we're going to do the survey, but how much money are we going to spend if the survey shows we can do X? I mean, how much money is this board willing to spend up there? We got an answer on the safety issue. So how much money are we going to spend up there? I mean, we've spent probably $7,500 to $10,000 already to get the safety issue question answered. Now another $5,500 to get a survey.
Plus legal fees.
Well, that kind of comes in. But to what end? I mean, I think this board needs to sort of decide how much money do you feel comfortable spending at this point up there to solve a question that is, in my mind, still uncertain what the real question is.
It's not uncertain in my mind what the real question is. It's uncertain in my mind what the best answer to it is, but I do think that there's an opportunity to do something. Hopefully we can do that as modestly and as inexpensively as we can. How we arrive at the decision of what to do and how modest or inexpensive it can be, I don't know without this information. That's where I am. I'm certainly not, and I think you know me well enough to agree that I am not inclined to spend money unnecessarily, and I think we almost always agree on that subject. By the same token, I don't think we're in a circumstance where it's reasonable to think that we're not going to do anything except absolutely mission-critical activities to keep the lung of the village operating. I do think we're in an opportunity here where enough issues have been presented to us, including a number of serious issues regarding speeding, that at minimum we've got traffic calming issues that we have to address.
So I thought one of the questions that was discussed, or one of the options were discussed, was a crosswalk that was raised as a means to calm traffic. Do we have an idea how much that costs? Because at least there we know we get some bang for our buck if we spend money on that.
We don't, but it wouldn't be hard to estimate that. It's just raised macadam, striping, and some signage.
I mean, to me, it
That's
kind of seems to make sense to...
That's not where the expense is, and you still have to have on both sides of that some place for people to,
Well, some sort of...
He didn't recommend a crosswalk without something on the other side, so it's not just a crosswalk.
There'd be sidewalk on both
you
sides of
can't
that
consider that.
crosswalk, even if it's a small piece of sidewalk on Robbins.
You have to
it
have
still
some
needs to be
place
there.
for people to stand,
Right.
which...
I
can't just
understood
put
it to be
a
sort of
crosswalk
a
in.
square, though, or it's a platform or something on either side
Yeah.
that people could...
No, but it has to, he did not recommend a crosswalk without some type of walking path sidewalk, something that, of course, has to be ADA compliant, whether that's 36
Right.
inches or 5 feet, whatever it is. It has to cross to something. He didn't recommend just putting in a crosswalk.
Okay.
So,
Crosswalk to nowhere.
a crosswalk to nowhere is exactly what it would be.
Well, I
So-
mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think that's I'd like to... The appeal to that, from my standpoint, is it's a traffic calming issue, and it's...
Which I think is absolutely bizarre.
Depending on whether or not, what you have to do in terms
It
of
is.
putting sidewalks or anything else beyond just the crosswalk there, but, I mean, you've got, you've got 70, what was it, Church Street, 75% of the people on Church Street petitioned said they don't want anything in front of their
Right.
house. And we don't have, it's not like we're washing funds to do this, and before we're said and done, before we even know what the solution is, we're going to spend, between $10,000 and $15,000, screwing around the edges. And I guess the question is, going back to 2002, I wasn't here, nobody seems to be able to confirm, but I guess it was somewhere that there was $90,000 for a path. I mean, if it's $90,000, are we going to spend $90,000 for a path?
I'm not in a position to say what we would or wouldn't spend. What I am in a position to say is, I think, at least for me, we're far enough along in the discussion that it appears apparent to me that we can make this better. And that I think we can make it better in ways that are modest and respect the needs and concerns on both sides of the argument, and I think both sides of the argument are valid. When we can do it, how fast we can do it, how much we can spend is dependent on a whole bunch of other issues, including what we have in the current and forthcoming capital budget, and what happens as far as the hits we take from the state pension plan, etc. I'm mindful of all of those things. But amid the fact that we confront a perfect storm of expense risks, I don't think we're in a circumstance with a very substantial fund balance and a very stable village budget that we need to deny ourselves the opportunity to do the planning work that puts in place reasonable improvements over time.
But I think that the whole point to the whole thing, the big point, the big elephant in the room is that there is a speeding problem on that street. This study did not address trucks by any way, shape, or form, which has a totally different stopping sight distance and everything else than a car does. We don't know how many trucks are going up and down that road. If they're traveling, if they're speeding, like 85% of the cars that are going down that street are speeding, I have a real problem with that. And I can't imagine that a raised crosswalk is a traffic calming measure and a stop sign isn't. That makes absolutely no sense to me. At a certain point, common sense has to enter into this. And if people are going to be slowed down, if cars are going to slow down because they saw a sign that there's a crosswalk, the only thing that's going to slow them down is when they see a kid in the middle of that crosswalk. And God forbid, I don't even want to consider what happens to that kid. But I just don't see a raised crosswalk being a traffic calming measure. And that's what we haven't addressed. I'd throw $5,500 at a traffic calming measure before anything else, but we have to address that. That is a problem.
I totally agree it's a problem, and I know you feel strongly that a raised crosswalk is a bad idea.
Bad.
Bernie Adler felt strongly that it was a good idea. I've received comments,
He also said it was a safe place to walk.
I've overheard comments from others in the community.
And he's an expert.
I've heard comments from others in the community that some people think it's a good idea, some people think it's a bad idea. We're not voting on a raised crosswalk at the moment.
Right.
The question is, does it move the ball down the field in a way the majority of it think is useful to spend $5,500 to find out who owns what on Church Street? Honestly, nobody likes to spend $5,500 on anything if you don't have to, but the reality is it's a good thing to know what we own along our street right-of-ways, and in a perfect world we'd survey them all.
How far are we from knowing? I mean, how many gaps do we have on the current map on our village?
Individuals who bought houses more recently may have more recent surveys, but they own them. The survey we have is from 1957.
That's the most recent survey that we have?
At the time when the road was changed.
Tax maps don't have...
Tax maps are not surveys. So,
I'm just wondering if we have some indication of what it is that we own, sort of some indication whether the gaps are.
Yeah, we have some indication.
I'm just wondering if, once we might get closer to knowing for sure once we pay $5,500. But, it goes to the question I asked last time, 2 weeks ago, where does this bring us? Does this bring us any closer to making a decision that we might be able to make without this $5,500? I mean, what are we going to find out? We're going to find out that maybe there are a couple of gaps there and we would have to, condemn that property or purchase that property? Is that what we're saying?
Well, you have the right of way, right?
We don't know where the right-of-way is with certainty. So
the right-of-way is
but
not
we have a contiguous right-of-way. We just don't know.
Well, we don't know what's in it. So along some stretches, if you've got a couple hundred feet of wood retaining walls and raised elevations, you know that's going to have an implication on construction. So there may be new driveway locations, there may be all kinds of things in the right-of-way.
When these houses were sold, and presumably a lot of these houses have been sold over the last 50 years, people didn't know where the right-of-way was at that point, or they all do? They separately know where it is, but we don't collectively know where it is?
They all have,
They have the survey written
they
to
all have their
them
own
for their
surveys.
property.
They could stake their own property.
And, okay.
Look,
I'm
the
just
end-
wondering, you know, if $5,500, if we find out that there are gaps in the right-of-way there, how that's going to slow us down? Is that really going to slow us down?
If we don't own property, we can't do anything on it until we get the right to do it in some form or another.
But we own it. We know we
No,
own
we don't-
some.
we don't own.
We just don't know how wide, right? We own, there's no break in what we own along the road.
Are there meaningful
that
questions?
we
Are there
know.
meaningful stretches here that we just absolutely have no idea of the width of the right-of-way?
How could we not have a right-of-way? I thought every road has we have a right-of-way in every road.
Well, you do, but let's just say that your right-of-way is 30 feet wide.
Yeah.
Your pavement's 24 feet wide. That's 6 feet, could be on one side, the other, or split on the middle, 3 and 3. It could be 1 and 5.
Oh, so it could be really...
And in the circumstance
You
where
don't
the
know.
road was
That's the
moved at
point.
one
You don't
point,
know.
there was talk of
Right,
acquiring
the more-
parcels.
Yeah, you don't know
Per
where-
Bernie Adler's
where those
report that
roads-
may or may not have
I mean, you
happened.
have right-of-way, you don't know where they laid out the road.
If you look at the old right-of-ways, they're not smooth lines, they jog in and out.
They're all over the
really
place.
a variable
Okay,
width.
that
This
being the case,
57
I
survey,
understand
yeah.
that, but the 57 survey, what does that show?
It shows they're all over the place. It shows in
Okay.
some areas
So it's
we have
real
very
gap
little
tooth.
right-of-way, and
Okay,
we'd have to
well,
All right,
acquire
so
property.
we can discuss that further. Bill, you have something to say?
Bill White, 6 Green Meadow Road, Pleasantville. We have a property on the corner of Green Meadow Road and Church Street. We went back and looked at our deed. Our deed matches some indications on the 1957 map, but the proposed conveyance was never done. Where the old lines on the 57 map, like the next door neighbor is the same line. What we don't know is where the line on our deeds is with respect to, say, the center of the road.
Right.
My guess at this point is probably from the curb edge, the village has maybe 5 feet into where our property lies before our property actually starts. My guess, I don't know that for sure, right now, the village has essentially taken 3 feet of that for one of these tied pathways, so it could be 2 feet. But that's just our part, because our part pre-existed the 1957 drawing. After the 1957 road map, they subdivided the properties along the north side of Church Street, 2 or 3 properties there. The road, you can't tell from that map directly without going back to the actual deeds and see what was conveyed to whom and by whom to find out exactly how much the village line lies on the side of the road or not. My understanding is from some residents, when the road was redone, part of the village property that was related to the old road was actually conveyed back to those owners, and that's not clear from those maps exactly what has been done, so
Right,
it's not
they're
at all clear
temporary, you're right.
what has been conveyed formally one way or another, where the formal things are and where exactly the boundary lines are. I just, you know, there may be enough space to do some things, there may not. Looking at my things in the 57 map, the 57 map is not sufficient to do that. You can probably make it correspond to whatever measure it does and see what changes that. I couldn't figure it out by looking at people where the lines.
Are there any markers, corner property markers?
Boom! They went away when railroad ties were. There's no markers. I'll give you an example. When Merritt went through to do the checks on Green Meadow Road for the sewer line, they went down because our property's owned. They went down to look at the corner of it. They couldn't find it. What they have right now is a nail with a little ribbon on it in the road where I think they figured probably the edge of the Green Meadow part of the Green Meadow Road was. It's not exactly where our corner point property is because our property bends at that point. But it's close enough for me to sort of guess where some things are. But no, you can't count on any property lines. There's a couple of places there, maybe 2 or 3 pipes in an area of 4 or 5 square feet, but most of those are gone.
Right.
Those are after reconstructed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else have anything to add? All right.
Yeah, I actually spent quite a bit of time looking over some publications that have traffic engineer and works for our firm that code for me on sidewalks and so on. And it struck me, looking at those, that the ITE, the Institute of Traffic Engineers, and some of the other folks who, AASHTO, who look at these sorts of issues, had identified that... Thanks.
Thank you, Judy.
Either that or use a bullhorn. Had identified a couple of things I thought were relevant to this discussion, and one, they all seem to ratify Adler's position that it was a professional judgment, that there were no standards for when sidewalks should or shouldn't be used. But they did go beyond that to talk about some other things that I thought were kind of interesting. One in particular is that, as we all know, but until you put it into words and think about it, you might not really get your arms around. And that is, some roads are not, and specifically and clearly, are signed not to be for pedestrian use. And for instance, you take a look at Route 9 or Route 9A, there are stretches of Route 9 where I think you'd be picked up and given a summons if you were walking down the shoulder up in the Croton area. But if you're walking on Route 9 in downtown Tarrytown, of course, that's Main Street. The same thing applies to 9A. And particularly in thinking about that sum, and what Mr. Adler's evaluation of what he felt the condition of the street was for pedestrian use, most significantly potentially compromised by vehicular speed and so forth. Crossed my mind that it might be, and also in light of the fact that at least one member of the community has raised this issue of liability, I thought that maybe the board should consider making a motion that any members of the community who do not feel safe walking the street, irrespective of the reports we've got from our traffic engineer, should in fact not walk the street. If they feel it's unsafe, they shouldn't, stopping short of saying this is not a pedestrian street. And I think that would help us feel a little bit more comfortable with some of the discussion that's going on here. And what I'm concerned about in terms of the direction that we're headed, and I think Mr. Potenza offered to possibly chair the committee that looks at what streets in some sort of hierarchy would deserve or could deserve some further evaluation for the potential for investment in sidewalks. And I think that would be great. But until we get to that point of understanding what that universe of streets is that may or may not require sidewalks, and maybe those that are currently sidewalked that don't need to be, we're reacting on a knee-jerk basis to community reaction on a street-by-street basis. And I'm concerned that if we took a street such as this and moved ahead incrementally or however toward some sidewalk implementation, we may find ourselves in the odd position of being criticized or potentially liable, if that is an issue, for not providing the same level of service on some other street that somebody else may say, well, you know, you did it over there, and we're just as bad or we're worse or some such thing. Why didn't you do it for us? And somebody did get hurt over here. And that has some implications that I'm a little concerned about. But mostly I think that it would be very helpful before striking a direction in one way or the other, that we really think carefully about what streets exist within the village. And we did some discussion to that by some of the presentation by some of the neighborhood members, but nothing more formally put together about what streets really should be looked at carefully for sidewalks, and which streets really are fine the way they are given today's traffic situation. And I think that probably the other gorilla in the room, if you will, is that construction of walks on any street put a disproportionate share of responsibility for future maintenance of those walks on a handful of property owners. If there were a walk placed on Church Street, there would be maybe 5 or 6 property owners that would now have year-round maintenance responsibility, snow blowing, all that kind of stuff. And as a property owner myself with over 200 feet of sidewalk, who has received complaints after sidewalks have been blown and shoveled, and it's a lot of work. You pay the price. And, hey, I bought the house, I saw the sidewalks, I knew they were going to have to be shoveled, so I'm not complaining. although I have in justice court about getting some tickets one ticket last winter, along with about 60 other people. But the point is that there are a handful of people that would be adversely affected by this, and it would essentially be a tax on them, a tax for maintaining that property. Now, I know shortly before we purchased our house, the section of the house facing Ashland Avenue had a new walk put on it with a 50-50 share. And I had to put on my tax burden, I think it was $6,000 that was spread over maybe a 5-year period. That was another form of taxation, which I shouldered. And as a I bought into the property. Actually, I didn't know that was there, and I had to have that resolved in another court dispute with the previous owner, a little hidden cost. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you about that thing that's on your taxes. That was nice of you. So at any rate, I think that there are several issues that we need to think through carefully before charting a course on this. And I think that particularly the issue with liability is one which I think we should nip in the bud by making a motion that anyone who feels uncomfortable walking on the street should cease and desist from doing so immediately, and not with any commitment that anything is going to change in that regard until and such time as we have more universal sense of what kind of sidewalk construction issue and repair issue of existing sidewalks that we have within the village. We have a lot of sidewalks like the ones on Romer that were separated by setback. My wife broke her ankle on one of those sidewalks a few years back. And that's a public liability. It was in front of your house.
We did the bill.
I don't know that we've tangled history on board.
Is that right? It was in front of my house.
Gee, we could have owned that house, but we decided who would want that house. Anyway. So I mean, there are a number of issues. If we did move down the path of going towards sidewalks, I have some very specific observations about what we might want to think about on the street. But I think that there are some very more universal village-wide issues that have significant capital improvement and maintenance issues that we should be thinking about before striking course on this particular proposal.
Let me just say one thing, Joe, to answer Steve. I think that I agree with you. I'm not sure about the litigation aspect. We should talk to Joel about that, although I appreciate what you're trying to accomplish by that. But, as far as there being a tax on people who would have a walking path in front of their house or along the side of their house, if it just seems to me that I understand that, and I certainly sympathize with that, but if we recognize that for every road that doesn't have a sidewalk, if that's the aspect that stops the discussion of sidewalks, then we won't be expanding our sidewalk network in our town. I mean, as you probably remember, I was on this board and was the trustee who was trying to get a sidewalk on Clinton in front of the high school. It's a street in front of the high school. It connects, a lot of walking traffic. And because of one, I love that resident, and I'm certainly not trying to diss one of my neighbors, but one neighbor decided that he didn't want a sidewalk in front of his house, and I lost that vote for a sidewalk in front of the high school 4-1. And what I learned that night was, or at least the conclusion I came to myself is that for the sake of a walking network, and I think we have to decide, the board has to decide if that neighborhood is going to be part of the walking network. But if we have a walking network, and indeed this is a progressive and a forward-thinking way of looking at our towns, then we can't be afraid of incorporating neighborhoods that want to be incorporated into that walking network. Now, for the time being, I'm setting aside the cost. Jonathan's given us some sobering news about our budgets, but setting aside cost, I think that when neighborhoods step forward and make a case and go towards at least answering the challenges that we would likely need answered in other neighborhoods, or should they also come at us with sidewalk concerns. I mean, you know, the speeding and the traffic counts and things like that. They make a reasonable case for a walking network, for being included in our walking network. I think that demands us to pay special attention to that. And you know, costs are something else, but it is a good thing. Our nation is moving towards a walking, you know, using less gasoline. When all of this happened in 1957, like it was out when the road was expanded, this was the gas age, it was the big car age we all loved to drive. Those days are different right now, and we're trying to encourage in our own village, walking among school kids and parents and the rest of us. I don't quite see, aside from cost, the issue of cost, and that's a huge issue. I don't quite see why this proposal shouldn't be taken extremely seriously.
I don't disagree with anything you've said. I've only suggested that we should think carefully about the provision of sidewalks throughout the community and try and come up with a rational basis for evaluating sidewalk. Otherwise, every neighborhood or street that comes forward, we're just kind of willy-nilly floating around with some kind of feel-good feelings about cars and walking. I think we should have a more thoughtful approach that would be more universally applied.
Joe is a good guy for that. You mentioned him, that he was
Joe had emailed us with some suggestions I thought were great suggestions.
They've been through this process. It would be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's an important process to take place, to take a comprehensive look at the village. But I think if you just examine the traffic count data, as I pointed out in some of the previous comments to the board, the Church Street is the 7th busiest street as far as traffic volumes are concerned. I don't think there's any other street with higher volumes that doesn't have a substantial amount of that street served by sidewalks, and that's the reason why I think it's important for this board to seriously consider advancing this project. I did take a look at the property map that was provided. I met with Steve Johnson, I discussed it with him, and as the gentleman pointed out, there are some gaps in the information. I think for this board to make an intelligent decision on how they want to proceed here, it would be in best interest of everybody to at least take the next step, which is to have the survey prepared.
You had sent in an email that had been forwarded to us suggesting weighted criteria, traffic volumes and pedestrian activities, proximity to the street, distance near a school, and so on. And I thought those are very helpful. It sounds like you may have a background in planning. Well, I'm not sure about that, but
Joe is the former deputy planning commissioner of Westchester and a Pleasantville resident.
To flesh these out, it's specifically in relation to Pleasantville and our community, and some of the things you presented before, I thought would be a very helpful exercise, and would certainly, whatever way we, as a board, went with this, we would have a feeling we were standing on much more solid ground. And I don't say this with any a sense that I, at this point, really feel strongly one way or the other, but I just think it would put us in a much more comfortable position of being able to take a position knowing that we had a database that was particular to this street and to other streets, and could set some guidelines for thinking about other proposals in the future.
Right. But as I say, just based on volume alone, the street rises to the surface of one that would benefit by the provision of some type of a pedestrian pathway.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Fair enough.
Right. I guess, Brian, the question I had, I hear what you're saying, and again, you know, I guess if cost wasn't a factor, they would need us. But Nanny Hagen was here. I don't think you were on the board when the Nanny Hagen people, when the Nanny Hagen neighborhood was here looking for sidewalks, and it was probably 50-50 divided in terms of people who wanted it and people who didn't. And I say that because I'm not quite sure which way it was, but it was very close, and there were passionate discussions on both sides. And we ended up doing nothing there because it wasn't the objection of one neighbor, it was the objection of kind of half the neighborhood. And one of the issues I struggle with in this scenario is that over the course of the public hearings, or not public hearings, but inviting the public in, we've gotten a much truer understanding of kind of the lay of the land up there and who's in favor of it and who's not in favor of it. And unless something's changed, I'm sure that people on Church Street who live on Church Street will tell me differently if I say this inaccurately. The majority of them are against it. And the majority of people who are in favor don't have houses on Church Street. So, you know, on Nannyhagen, where this board did nothing to help the folks out of Nannyhagen, of which that was a direct route right into the back of the school. There's lots of walkers, lots of pedestrians every day, even in the summer. Here we have a situation where, you know, the majority of the households that are going to be affected do not want it, and it is less evident to me that this is, you know, there's more traffic count on the street, no question about that, than Nannyhagen, but Nannyhagen was a more, sort of could be argued as a more core street that draws from a lot of different parts of the community and funnels them up to the school. So I guess the bottom line where I'm getting to is I'm not quite sure what the criteria to use when I'm trying to put it through the lens that you're trying to focus on, because I just think if we're trying to
I kind of followed what was going on with the Nannyhagen discussion, but I almost think Nannyhagen's an outlier. I think that the engineering obstacles were great. I think that you know, all things being equal, for a nice flat street, and if it were First Avenue in Oskaloosa, Iowa,
well, it's not so
I would say great,
Church
let's
Street.
build it.
I mean, Church Street's got its
tremendous
engineering issues either.
It's not like Nannyhagen. To me, it was not like. To me, it was an outlier. I think Church Street. I think Nannyhagen. I understand why people wanted a walkway there, and I'm not sure that we shouldn't do something like have one-way traffic or something. Everybody's going to object to something, whether it's look. Here's how we can sort of put it apples to apples. When you decide to build a sidewalk, even in front of the high school, where you have a lot of kids walking on the street in front of the high school, somebody is going to complain. There will be complaints. So I think ultimately I think about what's the vision of our community, and what's the vision of kind of small town America, and the way we need to look at the way we live our lives in small town America. And if any of you are interested, there's a wonderful book by James Kunstler called The Geography of Nowhere, where he talks about towns like ours and what things are right about towns like ours. And what he talks about is things like walkways, tree-covered walkways. That's what he talks about. This is a guy that lectures all over the country to municipal officials and talks about how we can improve our lives in ways that sort of harken back to 19th century life. We're still looking. I'm not an anti-modernist, but in some regards, I'm in favor of refining the way we live our lives. So that's all I'm talking about here. I think we should pay special attention when we can go in those directions. And in the case of Nannyhagen, I thought the cost was just overwhelming. Of course we couldn't afford that. We aren't making money here. So, and I think to some extent, what we can do, if indeed we do anything on Church Street, will be,
Just to be clear, Nannyhagen, we voted not to apply for a grant at Nannyhagen. It wasn't a money issue. It was, we don't want our neighborhood disturbed issue that ultimately made the decision as to whether or not sidewalks were in there. It wasn't a money issue. Much the same as the arguments I've heard from the Church Street people saying they don't want, they like their street the way it is, and they don't want it disturbed. So that's
well, and my neighbor who lives in front of the high school didn't want his neighborhood disturbed either. He didn't want his life disturbed. I just think that we at least from my point of view, I am very concerned with how such an act would change a neighborhood and change the lives of certain people, and maybe, I'm not sure what we could do, but I think we need to be really visionary in how we are, and how we live our lives in Pleasantville. So,
Well, did anyone in the audience have anything further to want to add? Can I just say, I'm happy to have this conversation for as long as it needs to take. I'm not sure tonight is the night to have it. That the issue we confront right now is whether or not to authorize $5,500 for this survey of Church Street. As I mentioned at the outset, my opinion is this $5,500 will give us information we need to have to be weighing these many issues, including the question of cost. So hold on one sec, someone's weighing in from outside. Hello, Village Hall. Peter Scherer, the mayor. Can I put you on the air? Here it comes. You there?
Yes,
Would you state your name for the record?
William Mitchell,
Okay.
No, address?
And address?
627 Washington Avenue, Pleasantville.
Okay.
You guys are sitting down here talking about 75% of the people on Church Street do not want it. All I've been watching this on TV is the people that want it are not village residents. Everybody on Robin Road are the ones that want it. They are not village residents.
Robbins Road is a village.
I'm told it's not.
No, it is.
Robbins and Ann Place are in the village.
Robbins Road is the end of the village.
Right.
Robbins Road and Ann Place are village residents.
Hold on.
One of those streets down there are not village roads.
Colony Glen and the house side of Brook Manor are not in the village, but Robbins is.
Oh, and they're up there asking for it. I don't think you should spend the money. Thank you.
Okay. So, just to be clear, there certainly have been people who have spoken who are not village residents, but who are members of the school district, and for that reason have an association with the village and a need to walk towards the village. But believe me, we are mindful of the fact that, as I mentioned, I think to people on both sides of this issue, we're confronted with a circumstance where there are lots of conflicting issues, including the fact that our taxing authority is only upon village residents, even though the improvement would provide advantages to those outside the village. But you know, in the end, we're here in the task we bargained for, which is to balance conflicting needs and to come up with what seems like a reasonable way forward. So that's where we are. Did you have something you want?
Well, I just wanted to make sure people are aware of the village boundaries. I appreciate your comment.
Okay.
I think it is important. I would not advise making a motion not to allow people to walk on Church Street, because you will essentially landlock probably about 45 houses that still remain within the village. This is not a situation where being progressive and taking some reasonable action creates floodgates for litigation. There are very specific factual issues that are at play in different cases, and I'd be happy to go through those with you. I'll be happy to work with Mr. Potenza on sidewalk plans. It's a function of whether or not this board is going to act reasonably under all of the circumstances. It is not unreasonable to ask that you conduct a survey for us to know where the right-of-way is. And as far as comments that, you know, you're asking us to assume costs, you know, we're bearing the burden of the costs associated with drainage issues. And if you want to take your arguments to the absurd of things were never done, people who live near the sawmill are subject to runoff and traffic noise. People who have wells that are dried up, too bad. You bought a house and now you're not entitled to water. People who live on Green Meadow, too bad for your drainage, you live at the bottom of a hill. If we are going to be members of a society, you need to act, you need to do things, and you need to be responsible. You cannot just pick and choose when you want to focus on expense or who's included in this village or who is not. I would guarantee you that there are many people from up in our little section of neighborhood that walk to your farmer's market and bring a lot of business there. You could probably expand that and not run the risk of losing residents who are willing to go to our farmer's market that have to drive over to Mesquite. Or who, if you have taken a look at Chappaqua plan, they did a list, they did a survey of what they like best of every community, and Pleasantville's farmer's market was one of them. So it's time to start acting progressively so that we're not in a situation where we need to reclaim this village as opposed to remaining competitive, getting businesses in, and making it attractive to businesses who can say there's a whole walking network of people that are going to be patrons. That's all we're asking for in the survey.
Okay, so can we proceed to vote on this?
Oh, wait, Mr. McDonald.
Oh, Doug? Sure.
Thank you. I'm slow but persistent.
I know, I feel your pain.
Yes.
You're supposed to say, I feel your pain.
Okay.
Yeah. Sympathy. Hi, Doug McDonald, 99 Church Street. As identified, one of the reluctant members of this community. I just have a few comments here. One, it's unfortunate that Church Street, and it amuses me, as it approaches Broadway, resembles the top of a bottle of fine wine. Somehow or another, the cork is right there at the intersection. And that's unfortunate because you've got, if the topography study shows all kinds of rearrangements of the properties at that end of things, it's going to be tough for them. Nonetheless, as Jonathan has recognized, I have, in spite of my mildly enfeebled state, tried to do some gardening work. Well, in the process of being out there, there's been a parade of these extremely large dump trucks. I don't know which direction they're carrying their loads, but one of them came flying toward Pleasantville at 35 miles an hour, if that radar device is accurate. Well, anybody crossing the road past that rise, they could move fast enough to get out of the way of this fellow, so I don't know. And as I commented at the last meeting, I would hate to see any of these lawn cutting people flying over a speed bump and scattering their tools and whatnot, and their workers in the back every which way. And I'd like to introduce the 2-ounce mouse into the room that we've ignored. When I grew up in Long Island in a very small community, it's East Williston, it's about the size of Pleasantville. We had our elementary and middle school kind of together. And we used to get a visit on a regular basis by one of the local policemen who offered a safety program, how to safely ride your bicycle on the streets, how to walk safely facing traffic, and so on. I don't know if Pleasantville has this potential for a member of the police department in an assembly or what have you to talk to the kids, whether this is done now or not. But I think training our youngsters to be safe on the road in spite of the presence or the lack of sidewalks, and incidentally East Williston had maybe half of its streets with sidewalks and the rest not. We learned early, and this stuck with us. And I think from the safety standpoint, if our youngsters are impressed with the idea that they are responsible for their own safety, we'll be much better off. Sidewalks, in my judgment, and they're a good thing. I mean, they keep your feet out of the mud and the wet grass. They're no safety issue because our road curves in such a way that if a sidewalk is placed on our side of the road, centrifugal force would take some of these less careful people across the sidewalk and into pedestrians. And this is something not to be dismissed so readily. As I mentioned in a prior meeting, there are approximately 4, possibly 5 vehicle transgressions that I've seen since we've been there in 1974. Well, okay. I probably said too much, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Hi, Corinne Balducci, 8 Robbins Road. I know before you make your vote, again, I just want to point out that throughout our community, we do have streets that are not totally safe with pedestrian crosswalks that probably are not totally safe for all pedestrians. I have to say that I think we need to start somewhere. I'd love to be tied into the village a little more than I already am. I don't know how much more I can get tied into at this point. But I'm hoping that you guys make the right decision, and I feel that the right decision is to go ahead and move this project forward. We really are bringing this issue up and up again as it's come up over the years, and hopefully we'll get some closure and we can move ahead. I think Pleasantville is very progressive and in many aspects, and I would love to see them move forward with making some change and stepping out of the box and moving ahead with this project. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. So motion 169 to authorize the services of SureTech for $5,500 to a topographic survey of Church Street from Broadway to the village line. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Peter, would it be too much just to take this one step further? There is some benefit to the municipality, as was mentioned earlier, to know what's going on with the right-of-way in the street, irrespective of what happens with local sidewalk development. And my only concern with seeing this go forward is that it signals potentially some kind of support within the board, tacitly or by extension, of the sidewalk issue. And I have a split opinion on this. I do think that it's of value to obtain some information on Church Street, but I do not feel that to me, is a vote one way or the other on the sidewalk issue, and I need to feel very clear about that.
We're not voting on the sidewalk issue. And
that.
as I have described it, at least as I understand it, my goal in voting yes for this is to gain the information that we need to understand what our options are. And those options range from looks like the survey means it would be hard to do anything to looks like the survey means we could do X or Y or Z. Then we'd have to know what it costs and address the question of, are we willing to spend it? Can we do it less expensive? Should we do it more expensively? Can we do it now? Is it a long-term plan? All of the above. I understand your concern, but I do think that both sides of this issue have been exhaustively discussed, and we're at the point where we need some more information in order to make a reasonable decision to go forward. And I add to that, just as you had alluded, that is information that it's reasonable for the village to wish to have for a variety of other reasons, including the fact that squarely on our desk at the moment is Adler's report that indicates that the speeding on that street is substantial and needs to be addressed. And so we're confronting traffic calming issues. We're confronting this question of whether a crosswalk makes sense or not. All of those issues may engage the survey as well. So for those multiple reasons, I think that this $5,500 expense brings us to the point where we can make a reasonable decision and that we can do reasonable planning going ahead. Does not commit us to doing anything specific, but I think it allows us to get our arms around the question of what could we do. So that's where I am.
Well, under those parameters, with a community understanding, I hope that in my voting to move ahead with this, I have absolutely no agenda for necessarily for considering any move ahead on sidewalks, unless until we get to the point where, as a board, we feel that we've gathered enough evidence to make that make sense, and for a whole boatload of reasons like you've and we've discussed over the last several months on this issue.
Okay, so your vote is?
Correct.
Aye?
Yes.
Okay. Motion approved 3-2 then?
Yes.
Okay. 170. Sorry, Mr. Holden, we finally got there. Whose is this now?
It's Steve.
Steve. Do you have the new resolution for Holden?
Yeah, there were a couple of wording issues that I had suggested on this.
Which I think I marked there.
Okay, yes. On the resolved issue, just to clarify what it is that the village board is doing to meet the condition that was placed on this site by a prior board, presumably through a tax sale or sale of village property.
Can you just, or I can or you can, give the background so those watching on TV understand what we're talking about?
We have an applicant before us who has been before the Village of Pleasantville Planning Board for the subdivision of, or re-subdivision of a residential property to 2 lots that would allow construction of a second single-family home on the property, or on a separate lot. And during the process of review, it was identified that this board, by a prior provision placed on the property, in order to perfect the subdivision, would need to review the plans and concur that they were appropriate for the property. This planning board has been through public hearings with the neighborhood, been a number of very interested people in this project, a lot of concern on the part of the neighborhood. The planning board requested a number of significant changes to the property, and also requested that the applicant show plans for how a second house could be built on the new lot in a way that would provide safe ingress and egress and grading and drainage issues that would not be overly disruptive of neighboring properties. Feeling that those issues had been reasonably resolved, the planning board voted to grant preliminary subdivision to the applicant for the property with a number of provisions, many of them typical to preliminary subdivisions, but one in specific addressing the need for the applicant to come before this board for their required, and I'll quote from the resolution, required look that until the plans therefore have been submitted to and approved in writing by the Board of Trustees. So before this applicant can move from preliminary subdivision to a final subdivision, this board has to be in concurrence that they've reviewed the plans and have quote-unquote approved them, by which I think it's reasonable to say that we're not either usurping the power of the planning board or the architecture review board, who have the real authority in this situation, but I think we're thought of at some past time as a watchdog to make sure that development on this parcel in the future would not be disruptive of the character of the street in all likelihood. And these 2 lots, as I recall from discussion before the planning board, that would result from the final subdivision of the property would not be dissimilar to the existing lots on the street in terms of dimensional characteristics, are not dissimilar to all the lots on the street. There are some topographic constraints, and I believe that the plans that we're looking at, and one of the reasons they were developed, if you look at the, not to make your presentation for you, but to try and give some background, if you look at the elevation in the upper left of the architectural drawings, you'll see that there's a fan-shaped door on the lower right, which is a garage entrance at a lower grade. If you look at this property on Guyon, there's I think an 8 or 9 foot wall across the front of this property, so developing driveway access into it would only make sense if there were a garage at a lower grade for a vehicle, if there was going to be a garage. And there was a whole series of walks to get up to the front entrance. And I think that that was the level of consideration that the planning board had asked the applicant to show, that this property could be reasonably developed with a home, with a rational look at how driveway access would work and how visibility would work and how pedestrian or walking access from the street up to the front door would work. And I think that that has been, by virtue of the planning board's preliminary subdivision approval, shown to them to their satisfaction. And I view our board's responsibility as kind of a rubber stamp of what the planning board has done so far, with acknowledging that in the future there's going to be a architecture review board review of this, and possibly another view by our board if something significantly different comes in at some future date when there's actually an owner with a construction plan in hand that differs significantly from what we're looking at tonight.
So you want to read the resolution into the record?
This entire...
Yes.
You would have shortened up everything else if you had to read the whole thing.
Whereas, as I've already discussed, whereas as we previously thought...
Poor Mr. Holden. I feel very bad. I'm sorry.
been very interesting.
Oh, okay, I'm sure.
We try to run an interesting meeting. How are we doing?
Yes. Whereas David Sims individually and as executor of the estate of Margaret Sims and Deborah Aubrey are the owners of certain property located at 51 Guyan Street, Pleasantville, New York, which property is designated in the Village of Pleasantville tax map as Section 99.18, Block 4, Lot 18, and whereas the Planning Commission of the Village of Pleasantville on February the 25th, 2009, granted preliminary subdivision approval to the owners of the property for a two-lot subdivision which would create an additional building lot on the subject site with one lot containing the existing single-family dwelling and the other lot to be developed with a new single-family dwelling in the future. And whereas pursuant to a certain deed between the Village of Pleasantville and Benjamin F. Price and Jane F. Price, the prior owners of the subject parcel dated July 23, 1952, said deed indicated that no new building shall be constructed on the subject parcel until the plans therefore shall have been submitted to and approved in writing by the Board of Trustees. And whereas the applicant has presented proposed building plans for a newly created building lot to the Village Board of Trustees, which plans are the same plans which were heretofore presented by the applicant to the Village Planning Commission, and whereas the Village Board of Trustees has reviewed such building plans, copies of which are annexed thereto, therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Pleasantville hereby approves, I'm just reading the wording that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Hereby approves the plans heretofore submitted and approved by the Planning Commission, which plans are dated October 14, 2008, and prepared by Gregory McWilliams, AIA, and it is further resolved by reason of the approval of said plans, the conditions set forth in the July the 23rd, 1952 deed has now been satisfied, except if there should be a material change in the building plans at the time the then property owner applies for a building permit on the newly created lot. Such revised plans will require further approval by the Board of Trustees, and it is further resolved that nothing herein shall relieve the applicant or future owner of the newly created building lot from obtaining other needed approvals from the Village of Pleasantville Planning Commission, Architectural Board of Review, Building Inspector, or any other board or official in the Village of Pleasantville.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
No, I'm just going to be clear. I'm going to be voting no against this because the first I really had a chance to understand this was today. I guess there was some previous discussion about it. I do not like to vote on things, especially when they're as complicated and interwoven as this is. I've never seen this before in terms of, nor has anybody else on the board, because
that is not true. It was presented to us.
No, as far as this board having some say over this matter, this is a highly unusual circumstance. Legally, it's I'm sure we're doing is fine. I just haven't had time to get comfortable with it. So
This doesn't require unanimous vote, does it? I think it does. Where is that? Was it this that required unanimous, or was it something?
I don't think so. No, I don't think it does.
Does it?
Simple majority.
Simple majority.
Okay. Well, what did I see? That was unanimous.
Okay, so...
That's about dedication of roads.
Oh, that's right. Okay. All right. I knew it was unanimous. All right.
Can I just explain my vote as well? I'm going to be voting yes, based on what Steve said about the Planning Commission having reviewed this thoroughly, and on advice from our attorney, who assures us that this is something we can do and is appropriate to do.
Well,
so I'll be voting yes.
And be reminded, for those who are watching, that because of this deed restriction dating back to the 50s, the village board is required to act in order for something to be done here. So I can assure you there have been...
subdivisions were all taken care of before it got to us. We're just approving.
It is a matter that we would not normally be addressing,
Yes,
and we've had extended discussions both with the village attorney and the attorney representing the Sims, and the resolution that has been read into the record is the one crafted by the village attorney. So
right, and I don't. No, there's no confusion. If I had more time to get comfortable with this, I'm sure I would, for all the reasons that Brian and Peter and Mr. Lopez said, as far as the ratification by the planning board.
Obviously, up to you. You could also abstain from voting, as opposed to leaving in the record an indication you were opposed.
Fine, I will abstain. That's a very good point.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
I abstain.
Okay. Motion approved. Thank you for your patience.
Sorry.
We appreciate it.
We should have put you first.
Just as an aside, I live along the aqueduct I'm James Holden, 52 Hoangeville Lane.
52 what? Hongeville?
Hoangeville Lane.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Oh, you're a neighbor of mine. I'm on Leland.
My family is 100-year residents of the same plot of land. We can't sell it to anybody other than a relative because of the power lines, of course.
Right, right.
I'm being somewhat facetious. But the issue
No, I'm
having
with
to do
you.
with Con Ed, which you discussed earlier, I really encourage you to try and develop whatever policy and whatever oversight that you can, because they came along through my property on the pretext of the blackout and all that, and we're trimming trees 20 and 30 and 40 feet into my property that not only cut down trees that had shielded our view from the high tension wires. They trimmed trees so aggressively that they have subsequently died, and so now I am faced with, I guess, the result of that, which is to have these trees cut down. I have a chainsaw, so we're very self-reliant up there for the most part, so I'm not too concerned about it. But the point is that whatever you can do to, and another example was that they came along and there was a row of trees, a hedgerow that I planted, and they cut every other tree.
They knew the ones that were going to fall.
Well, no, they were all essentially identical trees.
I know.
And they cut every other one, saying, well, they'll be back a year or two later to cut then every other one that remained. And so the logic of this whole thing really kind of escaped me. And in an effort to be a good neighbor, I said, go ahead and do what you have to do. And I regret that. I really do.
Totally, yeah.
Because they did, in my opinion, go too far. But so I encourage you.
So thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
All right.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
171 Mindy.
And the most important resolution of the whole night, I might add.
And it's appropriate that you got it.
That's right. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Pleasantville hereby approves the request from Leland Avenue residents to hold a block party, and none of you are invited, by the way, on Saturday, September 12th, 2009, from 3 to 11. And thank you, Rich Romanoli, for walking house to house and getting all our signatures.
Is that how you spell Leland? Capital L, capital L?
Well, at the
Or
block
just
party,
you
we call it...
Leland?
No, we call it Leland at the block party. Around 11 o'clock at night, it's called Upper Leland.
Is that because of the high percentage of French residents, or Leland?
Yeah, Upper Leland.
French Canadian.
Second.
Yeah.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Have a good time, Leland.
Leland.
We will.
Lacking anything further to discuss, at least in regular session, and looking forward to an exciting executive session on matters of personnel and litigation and the like.
Well, can I just say, I will say one thing, I'm sorry, but in spite, and I wish I would have said it before, but I'm just stewing over it, but in spite of what Ms. Busby said, that it's not up to us to decide these things and where we spend the money and where we put things, and it is up to us. That's why we're here, and that's what we are responsible for your tax money, and we are responsible for how that tax money is spent. And so it is up to us, and it is up to us to consider all of these things and decide which is more viable than the next. Unfortunately, those hard decisions have to be made by somebody, and that is us. It's not easy to do. It's not always, we don't always enjoy those decisions, but it is up to us to do that. So in spite of what Ms. Busby lectured us on before, I beg to differ with her opinion of that. So, don't need to.
Say goodnight, Mindy.
Say goodnight.
One announcement that I'm sorry I didn't make earlier, I had made last weekend, but coming up on August 29th is the Lions Club Horseshoe Tournament, which is taking place at 10 a.m. on Saturday, August 29 at Roselle Park. And if you are interested in this, it's a great event. You can get in touch with Rob Billman, who is the co-chairman at 7690144. So it's a great day to support the Lions and also to play horseshoes and try out your hand. Hello, Village Hall. Hey, how are you? Do you want to be on the air? Well, how about I pass on that message and she can contact me? Okay, fine.
Well, fortunately, none of our cars are under electrical wires this weekend, I don't think.
Okay. there being any further comment or issues,
So moved.
motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
Brian's close.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Holden.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. Our next regular meeting is Monday, September 14. Have a great end of the summer. See you soon.